get going? All right, so we're going to introduce here Kathleen. Kathleen, you were at the UNC Law School for a number of years?
Yes.
Got your JD, yes?
Yes.
Okay, and you were also at Sierra Club and Earth Defense?
Earth Justice.
Earth Justice, so close. Your talk is going to be roughly on loot box and gambling and the law. I assume mostly in the United States?
Yes.
Yes, okay, so I know you've done some stuff in other places.
We'll touch on this.
Okay. I will stop botching this introduction and hand it off to Kathleen.
Yes, no problem.
Yep.
So as hinted at, Sierra Club Earth Justice, I'm currently practicing in environmental law, but before doing that, I worked with 2 different firms that do video game law and digital entertainment law. Thank you. And loot boxes and gambling were my big issue in law school. I wrote a big paper about it, and I ended up doing a couple of presentations on it at the East Coast Games Conference, and as you might guess, at TwitchCon 2018 last October. I have made some edits to this since then, and we will talk about things that have changed since last October because there has been a lot. So for starters, as is the lawyerly thing to do, I have to say that this is not legal advice.
It's illegal.
Oh, I also have to say that I am sure that the last time I opened this thing, it didn't do this weird transition between slides. But there's nothing I can do about it at this point. So again, point 2, second time, not legal advice. So for starters, oh, that's going to annoy me, it's a slow transition. But for starters, I'd like you to raise your hand if you've played a game with loot boxes. Pretty much everyone. And raise your hand if you've spent money on loot boxes. Oh, some of you are so much more resilient than I am. And how many of you think loot boxes are gambling? Don't listen to me, I'm just encouraging. All right, well, talking about gambling law. So first, today I'm going to go through what is gambling. We're going to talk a little bit about case law, which sounds like a scary word, but most of the time when I do this presentation, it's not for lawyers, so hopefully I'll keep things understandable for everybody. Then I think we'll actually postpone getting into examples until a little bit later. I will highlight a couple of strategies that I've seen in the games industry to try and avoid it being qualified as gambling. And then we'll also talk about legislation and regulation. There's been a lot that's changed since October 2018, so I hope to go on a bit about that. And then lastly, I would love to have a nice discussion, questions. We'll talk about our favorite games, and because even though I raised my hand, I have bought loot boxes. I actually don't seem to play a lot of the games that really incorporate these mechanics, and a lot of the games that are making headlines with problems with loot boxes. So I very much am looking forward to your expertise there. So, for starters, what is gambling, legally speaking? It really depends on state law. It depends, the favorite lawyerly answer. But there are a couple of things that are pretty consistent across all states or all jurisdictions. The first is that, I'll go through them quickly here. First is consideration. Second is an element of chance, and I will explain each of these. And third is there be a prize of value. The other thing I wanted to note here before we get into a lot of it, again, it varies very much by state, and a lot of the way that people actually end up recovering under this is various states have laws that allow for people who have been involved in illegal gambling to essentially recover their money. So it's under these like recovery statutes where gambling law comes up, which is interesting. So, as I said, it depends, but in general, you have consideration, and consideration is a legal word for essentially money, but it's not necessarily limited to money. And I think it's probably better to say that it's definitely not money. It can be lots of things. We'll get into some of that, I think. But so an important point to note here, even if a game isn't directly taking money from a player for the loot box purchase, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's not gambling. Second, an element of chance. Now, how much chance you need versus how much skill you need, that's another thing that varies by states. And again, so even if it's a high level of skill in a game versus chance, and I basic like understanding of the word chance and skill will relate here. If it's something that's random, it's chance. If it's something that involves skill, it's skill. But there are interesting areas where the two overlap, and it's kind of hard to distinguish them sometimes. And I think when we get to examples, I'll bring up one that will illustrate this. And then third is prize of value. And that's the thing that has been most contentious in the courts, and what the case law is about. So a couple of things I'll note for prize of value. Courts have had a hard time understanding. Courts mean old judges, old white men who often don't play video games and weren't alive when video games came around. So I think there's a real gap in understanding on a lot of the parts of judges. So there's a couple of different ways that it can be a prize of value. Value, again, like consideration, can mean a lot of things. So something that you can pay, or that people would pay you money for, that's something that's of value. But in the case law, there are a couple of other ways that courts have established value in the past, and I'm going to highlight two of them here. And one is secondary markets. So that's kind of what I was hinting at before. If somebody will pay you money for it, that's probably a value. As opposed to a casino where you win chips and you take it back and they give you the money directly, secondary markets can also be used to establish value. And then a third thing, which I think is very interesting and ends up being relevant, is an argument for free plays. So if you can win another play at a game, a lot of times that's been used as value before. There have been all these gambling pinball machines and casino machines that have tried to get around this for a long time. And this is one of the ways that ended up not working out. And I will explain that a little bit more. So, case law, there are actually cases about whether or not video games, loot boxes, are gambling. But there's only 4. So there's not that much to go off of. First, Castle Clash. How many of you have played Castle Clash? Okay, perfect. So you'll have no idea if I get anything wrong. I too have not played Castle Clash, but I've spent a lot of time researching it. So Castle Clash in general is a game of conquest where you have these heroes and you upgrade their talents. Typical mobile game stuff, but what's important here is their hero shop. So they have these little heroes, these characters that you can purchase first with this thing here pictured on the right, this green thing. It's called a shard. It's called something different in every game, but this is the currency that you can earn by playing. And it then can be used to purchase characters like this crystal ooze. They also have another type of currency called gems, and this is what you pay for. And now gems can be used to roll for characters. So, off the bat, seeming like typical loot box mechanics. You have to buy the gems, so there's consideration, right? You're paying money. There's an element of chance. There's really great heroes. You're probably not going to get one. And then the third question, the most contentious, is what you get a prize of value. So, there's our crystal ooze. So you had to pay money to get the gem, to roll, to get the thing that you could have bought with the currency that you earned. Convoluted, right? I'll give you a hint now that, so there was a secondary market for this game, but you weren't able to sell individual heroes. You could only sell your account. This is something we see in a lot of games, and it was very against the terms of service, but people did it nonetheless. And this was something that the court looked at in ultimately deciding that it was not gambling because there was a secondary, despite there being a secondary market, because it was expressly prohibited by the terms of service and the game didn't do anything to encourage or allow for this sort of trading, they ended up finding that it wasn't a prize of value.
The purple ooze was not a prize of value? The heroes?
Yes. So yeah, it wasn't gambling because you weren't ever winning something of value. They didn't take the heroes back to the money. I do talk about this one a little bit differently, or a little bit further. So one thing I wanted to note here, so this isn't how it works, but here's an example. You've got money, you've got gems, and then you buy a hero. Roll for heroes. This is the kind of thing that we would expect would be gambling. Consideration, you've got your random chance, and then you've got your prize of value. So the reason that this might be considered a prize of value is because, like the free play thing, I think I forgot to phrase it this way, but free play, the reason free play counts as a prize of value is because you're getting something that would ordinarily cost money. So if you're getting a free play that you would normally have to pay for, that's how it establishes value. Does that make sense? Also, you can definitely interrupt me while I'm doing this part. I would like to save the big questions for the end, but if I am not being clear, or if you have a question, maybe I say some legal word that's not clear, please do stop me. So here, this looks like it could be gambling because you've got consideration, you're buying these gems, you're rolling for the hero, and it goes almost directly back to money, especially if you're buying. But actually, what they ended up doing, and this was that split currency thing that I hinted at, and I don't go into all the cases this in depth, but this is a very interesting one because, so, they had shards used to purchase a hero, but gems used to roll for the hero. Because if they had money that could be used to buy shards, and then shards to buy the characters, you would be able to do some conversions to figure out exactly how much money this character costs. But because you could only roll for it with the currency you bought, no one could look at this character and say how much money it costs. Does that make sense? Yes, I know.
Couldn't you look at the probability of getting it though?
That was an expected value that would come over the long term.
Well, if we can't even get courts to there's an argument there. Maybe you should be a lawyer. But it does, even if that's a possibility. So another argument with these, like you can only sell your accounts, for example. Courts weren't able to figure out, okay, well, how much is this character within the account costing? They only knew how much the whole account was costing. And so that was another reason that since they couldn't parse it out and figure out how much each thing was worth, then it wasn't something of value. I think they would have a similar thinking on that, probability-wise. It'd be, because it's not something that's like directly, this costs this much money, they'd have a harder time establishing value. And even here, they didn't find value. But I think this dual currency strategy thing is super intentional, and that they had a smart person who told them to do it this way, and it's something we see in other games. And I think I'm slightly jumping ahead here, but there have been some games, I think, does anyone here play Apex Legends? Okay, well, they were in the news recently for their loot boxes, and what they ended up doing, and this is something that I think a lot of people suggest as a strategy about loot boxes is, well, if people don't want to roll for it, give them the option to buy it. They can skip out on the gambling if they want. But that's problematic in terms of gambling law. I think, like I explained, if there's an ability to buy it, then you know exactly how much it's worth. So it helps to establish, it would help a prosecutor, or not a prosecutor, but an attorney establish that something had value if the game itself gave it a value. So although that is an idea that might be good for us, it'd be bad for them legally.
You corrected yourself on prosecutor. This was not a criminal case?
No.
Who brought the action?
I believe, well, these are gambling recovery statutes, so I think it would have been the person who suffered.
The player.
Yeah. Yeah.
So in a lot of these games, you can use like the premium currency to buy the in-game currency. Like you can pay gems to get shards. So would that let them then look at how many shards the hero costs and value it that way?
I think that would weigh in favor of them finding value. So everything that I'm saying here, it isn't a clear-cut yes or no. It's things that would lean towards it being gambling, and things that would lean away from it being gambling. And so yes, I think that would lean towards it being gambling, a court finding it to be gambling more specifically, because it would be more easy to establish that this prize has monetary value, even though it has monetary value.
What was the plaintiff trying to get to justify the recovery? I mean, if you're operating under a recovery statute where they say, okay, you're entitled to get your money back, that means he must have been, it must have been his burden to show, well, here's how much money I think I lost that is covered by this. Is that part of why he lost? Is that the relationship between how much he had to pay versus what he got for it wasn't easy to establish owing to the dual currency?
I think I follow you, but I'm not sure that was part of the calculus.
What did he base his loss on? How did he establish it?
So,
Well, at some point, he must be going in court and saying, I have been deprived of this amount of money because of illegal loot box mechanics in the game. He must have had to specify that amount. I'm wondering, how did he do that? How did he differentiate money that he felt he was wrongfully deprived of under the statute versus money that is perfectly okay because some things you have to pay to play?
so I think any money that he put into this loot box mechanic would be something that he could get back under gambling recovery statutes if they found this to be gambling. I don't think he would need to argue that, well, sometimes I got something of value, so I'm not going to count that, because whether or not he got what he wanted or got something of value or not doesn't change whether or not it is gambling.
It's mostly the sense that these games are designed to basically get you to spend more money without you thinking about it. So when you look at your balance, see how much you spend on the game, then and based off of what your characters get, because it's random, so you can get like a blue back roll, get like all the money you spend on it, you just get like one swine, so like only 2 premium characters, then that's, you feel gypped in some ways, but technically like that's where it becomes less about gambling, or is it just you just spending too much money on something, like if someone spends $1 million on nachos and then feels sick about it, like that's then being the fault. But in the game it's more this sense of deception, because the chance on that you may get this or you may not get this, and then you look at your bank account and say, well, I'm destitute and stuff, and there you go, that's no problem. The only thing is the whole cashing out thing, like you can't cash out the character show the character gambling. I have a question about the gambling laws, like specifically what were they meant to protect? Gambling laws in general, is it meant to protect people from getting destitute, or is it meant to protect inflation in the economy or something?
I think it's meant to protect people from illegal casinos, essentially. And one thing about this, I think if we take it back to the casino, or if we just take it to a casino, if you went to an illegal casino and were gambling there, say you spent $500, but you won $200, I think that the $500 would be what is at issue, not the $300 that you lost. I can't say that for sure, but that would be my impression. Does that get to what you were getting at before about?
Yeah.
Okay. And do you have a follow-up on your point?
Almost in the sense of basically, when I hear gambling laws, it basically stop casinos and stuff, but I'm more saying the moral implication, like, aren't these laws supposed to protect people from basically randomly going destitute by chance rather than actual skill or actual skill and merit, rather than just basically chancing themselves? Or the gambling laws there just to prevent inflation, because like if someone gambles away and makes a lot of money, then that can really screw up the economy in some way or something like that. But basically like that, like in the end, it's basically they want to make money by via chance. But like with the gambling laws in particular, like what I see with people with gambling problems, you want to keep those laws in there to keep them from going destitute, because because they're designed to be addicting in some ways. But most of the lawmakers are mostly just seeing is basically like they can't cash out, and so on and so forth. But the games are causing people to actually become destitute, like that based off the design, and that's the most interesting thing that I always give to these gambling laws, saying like, wait, are these laws supposed to protect? What is the laws are protecting at this point? Because it seems to be not protecting the people being destitute, but more protecting the people on top, basically making the money themselves.
I think that there's probably multiple things going into why we have these sorts of laws. I don't think that it could only be protecting the illegal gamblers, because this allows people to get their money back, which would hurt them. But I think there are lots of things playing in. I think that it is in part to protect people, let them get their money back, but I also think it's to protect regulated, legitimate casinos, because they have to go through a lot of hoops and they have to go through a lot of hoops to be a regulated casino. And so if people could skip all of that and just gamble and offer people the same fun and the same risk without any regulation, that would be very problematic. So I think it goes kind of both ways, but it's hard to say, and I think people would disagree.
Yeah.
The next one I want to talk about is Game of War, because I said there were 4 cases. Has anyone here played Game of War?
No.
I also have not played Game of War, but I do remember these commercials.
Commercials were amazing.
So this is another one where there's a loot box mechanic. from my understanding of it, you build virtual towns and armies. You can purchase in-game gold that is then used to like improve your town, or it can be exchanged for chips, which are then rolled for resources. And I think an interesting thing to note here is that, so you buy in-game coins that can then be used at essentially a casino to win resources, but it can also be used to win more gold. And so, again, it should be value because it's something you ordinarily have to pay for. If you have to pay money for gold, and you can use gold to win more gold, isn't that of value? Does that make sense? I keep looking at you because you have the most skeptic look, and so I think that you might be the hint of when I'm losing people. Yes, you. I think you just have a serious expression.
That's a good trick with a jury too.
Yeah?
Yeah, I remember that.
Well, I haven't done a trial with the jury yet, so, but I'll keep that in mind. This was also not gambling. I think this one isn't super helpful because the specific state law that it was under, if I recall, actually used the word money instead of like money or something else of value. So that kind of limits its importance, which is why I'm not going to talk about it. But again, another case law striking in favor of it not being gambling. Then we have double down casino. Casinos in the name. That. So again, this was so fun. When I was doing the research for this, it was self-described as the full casino experience on Facebook. Like they really played up the gambling element here. You could buy chips, get free chips each day, and if you ran out of chips, you could buy more chips. So just like a casino. This was also not gambling. Again, it came down to a state law issue. In this state, there had to be essentially a winner and a loser, and because when you pay into the system and then you're gambling with those coins, you don't, in the court's view, you didn't have any money on the line anymore because there was no way to cash out. So there was never going to be a winner or loser. It sounds weird and it's not worth getting more into because it was a whole state law thing. The interesting one is the next one. Yeah,
So you gamble with your real money and you win fake money?
And fake money is not money.
So those weren't loot boxes, really, right? I mean, I know other than, it's a slot machine with all of the, like shady tactics that come along with that. But otherwise, isn't it the same as putting a quarter in a Miss Pac-Man machine?
Into a Miss Pac-Man machine?
Yeah, I mean, it's just a game. Like you're putting money in and playing a game, but you're not like the thing that you're getting in exchange for your money. It's not like you're rolling the dice right then in hopes of getting something better.
So I think this one is slightly different than that. Just like, if I remember the details of this, just like the other examples, this one had a secondary market where people were selling their account with tons of coins for money. Like you can't sell your Miss Pac-Man account. So you are putting in money, but there isn't a chance to get anything out. And so yes, even though this is free money, which isn't money, people were selling it and getting money.
Sounds like the worst casino.
Yes.
You talked about free plays earlier, and so that would be ruled not gambling, because every pinball machine seems to have that feature, so I figure it's gonna not be gambling.
Yeah. It gets complicated.
But you wouldn't be able to sell the free games, so that defense would be there as well, wouldn't it?
Couldn't do that.
No, I suppose the guy behind you might
50
say,
cents to play, and I
yeah, the
said,
guy behind you might say, I'll give you 25 cents for it. I suppose the viability of that market would be a factual question, but your original definition seems to come into play too. Is a pinball machine more skill or is it more chance?
But I think you were asking about.
It's like a random, like if your last two numbers match a random draw.
Oh yeah, I haven't played pinball in
Yeah.
so long, you're right.
Yeah,
Yeah, so,
I see your point.
yeah, I mean, I am a pinball player. Typically, the original pinball machines, they didn't even have flippers. You just plunged the ball and you just saw where it landed. And they used to pay out money, but then they got around it by saying, well, you win a prize, which was a piece of candy, and then you brought the candy to the front desk, and then they give you whatever that
I think slot
candy's
machines have
worth.
done that too with phone cards.
Yeah.
Not that anybody knows
And-
what a phone card is anymore.
Yeah, pinball today, I can tell you it is a skill-based game, but I mean, there is some luck in the game itself, and at the end of the game, yeah, there is an appearance of a random chance of winning a free game. It appears to be a 1 in 10 chance, but in reality, it's more like 1 in 20 or 1 in 30
It's
chance.
rigged?
And what's that?
It's rigged?
No, there's a setting in the operator menu. You can,
Yes, that's called rigged.
yeah, yeah, but it's a free game. I mean, it's not money. It's just awarding an additional game.
But you know the exact value of it.
Yeah,
To
so
your
this is-
point,
Yeah,
though,
that's
about pinballs, there is value to that point. A lot of these gambling recovery statutes have been made as gambling, called the people who make slot machines, anyways, essentially casinos have been trying to skirt laws for a long time, so they've had these sorts of case law precedents that can be applied, but there is certainly a level of discretion there. I think the question there would be, is it really is it predatory? Are people suffering? Is it something that anybody would bring? Is it worth bringing? And so when you look at it, that would probably never be worth it, even if you could make an argument under technicalities that it is gambling, versus here where I think there's a better argument against what they're doing here. But that is a fair point.
Can I follow up 1 second more about the secondary market issue? Because am I understanding you that the existence of a secondary market in which I could sell my account, but from which I have no other way to convert it into money, that mere fact could conceivably turn a non-gambling violation into a violation of one of these statutes? So as what I'm wondering about is the game designer or the game vendor, whoever's got liability here, they might play by all the rules and say, hey, nobody gets anything of money from us. They get varying levels of non-money return depending upon things they can't control, but they don't have to play if they don't want to, so I'm clean. And then I wake up and discover, no, I'm getting sued because somebody accumulated a whole bunch of non-money winnings and sold their account.
Mhm.
That can happen?
So I think that is part of the reason that these cases went the way that they did, and part of the reason that those game makers were protected, because they had strong terms of service where they disavowed any secondary market. They had done what they could to minimize that. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. But without that, without the fact that the third-party sale violated an agreement that they had made with their users, that alone could be enough to tip the scale. It sounds like you could go ahead and write a game where you're saying, I'm never going to give my player any way to cash in. They'll never get any money back from me, and they know it from the beginning, so it's not gambling. Unless I've also got a commitment from my player that they won't sell their account, I could, by that omission, still be violating it because they can sell the account, and that turns all the fantasy, the virtual chips that they won from me into real money. And that makes me liable?
I think the better way to put it is that in terms of levels of risk. So if you have strong terms of service, you do everything you can, you're at a much lower risk. If you don't do that, you're increasing your risk.
That's good to know.
So this one is the most interesting one, and it will get a little bit more into this issue that you've identified, because I think the big thing about Big Fish Casino that's different is that they hadn't disavowed a secondary market. In fact, they allowed players to transfer chips between them and took a cut of every transfer. Yep. But even still, originally wasn't gambling, but it was appealed. And actually, I gave my first talk on this issue the week after the appeals came out, and it was appealed in the Ninth Circuit, if you're interested. 2018 this came down, and it was finally the first case finding that this sort of thing was gambling, that these chips had value. And it was through a sort of free play argument like I've been hitting on all throughout. What was interesting here is that even though the secondary market was more egregious, they were letting people transfer and they profited off of it, it wasn't the secondary market that the court used to justify their explanation of this being gambling. They still discredited the secondary market. And They also didn't care that the chips could be earned. So that's important to note for its precedence going forward. So the argument that they used was this free play argument. Because you were getting something you ordinarily have to pay for, you were getting free plays, and that was how it was valued. The secondary market wasn't enough, even though it was egregious here. This is not me saying that you should do this, because I don't think that this is a good strategy, and I think that this is risky, but I'm just giving you the facts. And yeah, and it didn't save them that the currency could also be earned over time. Yeah. Whew. I, at the time, thought that this was going to indicate a kind of switch in the courts and a kind of switch in the handling of loot boxes. And I think to some degree, that's been true. So I think I'm gonna skip over examples at this point. Actually, no, I'm gonna bring up one, which I'm always kind of bummed when people bring up early in my talk because it often derails the conversation. But nobody has brought up trading cards yet.
I've been playing my son, so.
Oh, I'm so appreciative. Thank you. Yeah, trading cards. Consideration. You're paying money. Element of chance. Sometimes you're getting good things, sometimes you're not. Prize of value. Secondary market. You can get money for that magic card. Gambling? I don't have a conclusion on that. I will add that I think it was the makers of Pokemon cards that were sued in the 90s under this like racketeering, big like federal thing saying that they were, it's like an organized crime type statute.
Pokemon is organized crime. Badly organized.
It was not successful, but
I guess in the terms of trading cards compared to the loot boxes, it's based on how egregious they are. Like trading cards are pretty banal, but the loot box system, especially after Battlefront, when you saw EA basically really ham-fisted over there, really started talking about it. So like the industry is basically, gaming industry is basically pushing the boat on how much money they can get out of this loot box system, and they're just pushing until it breaks. So I think, and with the trading card system, like I've never really seen that as mostly like, hey, cards and stuff. It never really like forcing like super quick.
I think you should have met me as an 8-year-old.
I know. I mean, I play Yu-Gi-Oh too, but mostly like in the sense like it wasn't so much of a big old like the egregiousness is basically isn't really throttling too much people from like there's the stories of basically FIFA where kids are basically bankrupt using a credit cards accidentally. You waste your money. Like I never got that for trading cards, but it's basically different with the times nowadays. If the trading card system was more like was really egregious, then maybe
It's not as different as you think.
Well, I think that there are a couple of important differences, and some of them that you hit on. It's so much easier to steal your mom's credit card and buy a bunch of loot boxes in Star Wars Battlefront than it is to go out to a store and do all that stuff. But I think I actually do think that the big difference, I'm trying to decide right now, well, I think the big difference between trading cards and a lot of the loot box mechanics that we've seen are video game companies, for example, ability to tailor their rates of people and to change them over time. And I think I think is the distinguishing factor. So trading cards, everybody's got the same chance. I think there are still some problematic elements when you look at it legally based, but it's not as problematic because everybody's treated equally, which I think is a good start. And on most of them, if not all of them, you know what the odds are. You can find it at least. Versus game companies have self-admitted to changing your win rate. Oh, it's been a long time since you spent money, so let's give you a quick win, so you'll buy more. Or even targeting mobile games, targeting really high spenders against each other to try and like motivate them to buy more. There was some other game where you did some sort of battle and they were, oh no, this was a patent. Oh man, I hadn't thought about this in a while. I think it was Blizzard. They have some sort of patent for a matchmaking system that can like pair up. If you've got a great, I don't know how accurate this is, but this is an analogy of what it does. If you've got a great weapon and this person's character is really weak to it, they'll match you up. So he thinks, wow, or like right after purchase. So he thinks, wow, my money, it was so worth it. I just got this awesome thing and I dominated, so I'm gonna buy more. And this person thinks, wow, I really suck. I need to like spend some more money to get some awesome stuff. So they can do things like that that's really manipulative and targeted. And when you combine that with kids, everybody gets up in arms. So I think that there is a difference between trading cards and loot boxes, and that's one of them.
Yeah, that's what I meant by it's more the video game was much more predatory compared to the trading card one, because back then it's not like digital way back yet and stuff. So they couldn't like basically specifically target specific packs. You have like this one that could thing and do the whole thing with the whole parent elements with each other, like some like specific different states or more having tournament against each other or something like that. But yeah, it was that's this stuff.
Yeah, that I think it was Blizzard that had that pack, but maybe I shouldn't
It's
keep saying
probably-
that.
yeah,
Okay,
I
alright,
think
people are
it was-
nodding, right? I'm not gonna hopefully
Yeah,
I'm not gonna sue.
Activision. Yeah.
Anyways,
No.
that was particularly devastating to me because I used to / maybe still do deeply love Hearthstone, and I just couldn't imagine the game mechanic. I mean, I already spent too much money on it, to be honest, but the thought that it was also not fair and okay, so loosely, strategies that I've seen, things, and again, this is all about risk. Lean towards it being gambling, leans away from it being gambling. In general, we don't know what the law is until a court tells us, and even then, especially here, it's the Washington state, but, gotta have a plug, talk to a lawyer if you're worried. Lawyers are great. Hello. Not me though. No, I'm great. I mean, don't talk to me, but please do. Okay. Strong terms of service. That's something we've identified. That can help. If you do everything in your power to prevent people from cashing out, that will lean away from it being gambling. If it can be earned over time, that will probably lean away from it being gambling. People don't have to spend money to get it. They can earn it over time. Split currencies, that thing we went into, that I think is super interesting, and that might help lean against it being gambling. And transparency and odds. This isn't a legal argument, but more of a morality argument. If you're telling people what's up, like with Pokemon cards, it makes it less egregious. It makes it more fair. People are less likely to object or get mad about it, so you're less likely to get in trouble for it. Levels of risk. You still always have risk, and this is not legal advice. And then lastly, I was going to talk about legislation and regulation, which, when I did this, October 2018, there were lots of bills being proposed in the US. The ESRB at that time had taken the position that it wasn't gambling because no matter what, you always got something, which I thought was irresponsible because even penny slots are still slots. Even if whatever. So it's been declared illegal in places, civil and criminal penalties. There were EU countries investigating. And since then, I've kept somewhat abreast of the issue, and I wanted to include this one lovely picture because, see if I know what this was.
The surprise mechanic.
Surprise mechanics when they went and talked to UK Parliament. I know we had the lead counsel for Epic Games, he's all the way at the left, Canon Pence, and then I think the woman on the right was from EA.
Yep.
I don't remember who the people in the middle were. This has been my favorite meme of late. Okay, so then there were some other things I wanted to talk about. I know that the ESRB since then has decided to put, so one of the other things that I suggested in the past besides transparency and odds was labeling. If you put a label on games or if you change the rating, that was a sort of self-regulation of the industry that might minimize the chance of lawmakers who don't understand games messing with games. I know that the ESRB decided to label in-game purchases, but it included anything that had microtransactions, so it wasn't, yeah, I'm getting the thumbs down over there, and I agree, it's punting the issue, and again, continues, I think, to be irresponsible handling of this issue. The other thing, I think I'm skipping around a little bit, but just this month, the FTC had a workshop on these sorts of mechanics too, so the US government is looking at it. And I think it was after that or at that when console, so Microsoft, Sony, they teamed up and said that if you don't disclose your odds, you're not going to be allowed to sell your games on our platforms.
It was the same day.
Same day.
Probably not a coincidence.
Yeah.
Who was at the hearing?
Yeah.
The ESA representative. He's like, I think about Mexico.
I think that's a good step in the right direction. The other thing that I remember reading coming out of that workshop is in the In the first panel, they had talked, so I already talked a little bit about how certain game companies were self-admitting to manipulating people's win rates based off of how much you had spent, how much you hadn't spent, how long it had been since you had won, and targeting people and pitting them against each other, just horribly manipulative things. They also revealed, I already hinted this before, that certain companies would give streamers a better odd when they're opening loot boxes. So we'll buy you some loot boxes, we'll turn your win rates up really high, you have millions of kids, people watching you, they're gonna get a certain impression of how easy it is to get XYZ item. That's horrible. Such a bad idea. And that was confirmed at this hearing, or at this workshop, whatever the language is. There was something else about that now I've just blanked on because I got obsessed with how bad that was. Oh yeah, Epic. Ooh, okay, go ahead.
You mentioned a few things about odds for a while, and I wanted to ask something about, in actual casinos with slot machines, in America, it is illegal to change the odds around based on how they're playing, right?
So my understanding of casinos is that they, I don't think it's an exact win rate, but I think they have like a small range. I don't know why I'm looking to you. You're not a gambling expert.
Actually, I know a little bit about it, but you're doing fine.
Yeah, so there is regulation of how high, how low the win rates can be, and all casinos have to meet that.
Right.
That
They can't like change it based on you sitting down playing a few rounds and it's like, oh, we need to win. We're gonna just force one in there.
No, I can't answer
So
that question.
if you do
easily.
something like that in the game, you're not just saying, well, we're not gambling. You're saying if we were gambling, we'd be illegal for doing this, like with dynamic odds.
Wait, say again?
If loot boxes were at some point considered gambling, then dynamic odds would be straight illegal.
Dynamic odds, like.
Yeah, I know what you mean by dynamic odds, but
I guess it's a question of whether or not it would fall under the jurisdiction of a statute that regulated gambling. If it isn't gambling, then anything that regulates gambling doesn't regulate it.
Right, I'm saying if it becomes seen as gambling. Like
Right.
with
dynamic
the
odds would be
final
straight up
case you
legal.
brought up.
Straight up illegal, you said.
Yeah.
Why are you thinking that? I mean, I think it should be, but I'm trying to plug it into. I don't know, because gambling law. If it's gambling, yes. What are you thinking of here? What would make it straight up illegal? If the loot boxes are already gambling.
Like, is it
The loot
currently
boxes were-
illegal to change the odds of a slot machine?
Oh, I see. Because
As you
casinos
play.
can't do it.
Right, like if loot boxes were gambling,
Okay.
you can still sell games with loot boxes, you just have to put AO ratings on them, I assume,
Mhm.
and follow all sorts of new laws.
Mhm.
But dynamic odds, even in that world, would still be illegal.
I don't know if I can answer your question fully, but I think the regulation that's put on casinos, they have like their own board kind of thing. So if the same things applied to games, then I think the answer is yes. But I think it's more likely that something different would apply to board or to games. But I'm not sure. I'm not sure.
So I keep saying laws, like, are these all state laws or are there federal gambling laws?
Everything I've talked about has been state laws.
The way that the United States tends to enforce in the same area of concern is they look for something that meets the interstate commerce requirement that allows them to regulate it constitutionally. So where you would tend to see it with the feds getting involved would not necessarily be because it was gambling per se, but if they showed that you were using the internet to facilitate criminal activity, they might be able to say, okay, it's a violation of a law that prohibits you from using the internet to carry on criminal activity. So the criminal activity they would prosecute wouldn't be the first instance activity, it would be the fact that you use the internet to do it. Awful lot of federal criminal laws based on some sort of rather fanciful connection between what you did and interstate trafficking. But generally speaking, ordinary criminal laws about just what you can do in your home or on the street or whatever, those are left to the states.
How does any of this like relate to like the fantasy sports gambling stuff, like DraftKings and whatever? There's like a fantasy football instant play thing. Like, is that related at all, or is it separate statutes? 'Cause it's like
Actually, all your games skill or something.
There are arguments about them being skill versus chance.
I know there's been some legislation around like DraftKings, and like it because they were doing it state by state and stuff like that, but like.
Yeah, I wonder if more federal things get implicated there with, because I know like they have really, like if you live in certain states, you can't do it. I'm not sure. I looked into this at a time, but it isn't something that I paid super much attention to. I'm personally not a huge sports fan, so. I also wanted to note that Epic now is doing their X-ray llamas, where you can see what you're going to get instead of the randomized thing. There are lots of game companies that are responding to this. I have been talking for a long time, but there was actually one other issue that I wanted to talk about. And even though everything we've been talking about so far has been about prize and value, there's one area, again, as a former Hearthstone person, on the chance and skill argument that I was thinking about, and Magic the Gathering. So, chance skill. What if your skill in certain games, how do I explain this? Well, okay, I think the best, it's been a while since I've pitched this, but like Magic the Gathering. Okay, sometimes those things are connected. Like, if you do really well, let's imagine a game, you do really well, you win someone's card, I'm not explaining this well. We'll come back to that. Let's do questions. I'll think about it.
Kind of like a big rambly question, maybe.
Okay. Let's do
Like
it.
one of my favorite things to think about is like.
The answer is going to be, it depends, I can tell.
Yeah. But yeah, more. It's not really even a question. It's just like a bunch of thoughts, and maybe you'll have a response. We're like increasingly involved in this society and this like sort of global economic system that is like way too complex for anyone to have any idea like how it all works or fits together. And like you mentioned before, like the people who are writing the laws and legislating this stuff have no idea how video games work. And like we're all kind of trying to figure it out together, but each party involved has like a different interest, right? Like if I'm a video game developer, I obviously want to maximize time on the game. If I'm like a game like platform developer, I obviously want to like maximize revenue and profits and reach. If I'm a lawyer, I either want to like maximize tax revenue or protect my constituents or protect the lobbyists who took me out to lunch that day. Or
Legislator, you said
oh yeah, lawmaker, sorry. Right. But how, I guess, like, that's it. I don't know. It's not really a question.
Well, you did give me time to think of what I was trying to say earlier to an
Oh,
extent,
cool.
so much appreciated.
You're welcome.
One example is like Magic the Gathering, okay? Friday night draft. There's a certain element of chance when you open that thing, but there's also a certain element of skill based off of what you do with that thing. So what happens when the skill is reliant on the chance? Or in some other imaginary thing, when like the skill determines how many chances you get. Question. All right, next question.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing is like, isn't like being able to run a kind of like statistical predictive model in your head a skill that you're working on a probability field?
Oh, yeah, I think so.
So if you can count cards, it's not really gambling.
Right.
Go
Yes.
ahead.
So what if there was, let's say a loot crate where they tell you that you will get like one item exactly, and then so you know that you're gonna get one item for a fact, and then there will be 5 other items which are completely random, or well, random but are considered to be small value, like maybe a skin or a costume for a character, but but it includes the one thing that you want, so you so as the consumer you buy it just because you want that one thing that you know for a fact you're getting. And then there are a couple other things which are random but in small value, like would that be gambling, or
That would still be at risk of being gambling.
okay.
Because you're paying money for it, I'm assuming.
Yeah.
There's an element of chance, even
Yeah.
with those 4 things, even knowing that there's one thing. Like,
Yeah.
okay, if you're playing a slot machine and you're guaranteed to get 1 penny back, but sometimes you might get $25 and you have to pay $1 to play. Like, getting something back always, or getting something, even if you know what it is, like that doesn't always make it not gambling. And then prize of value, I'm assuming that'd be your thing too. But you did bring up another good point, cosmetic items.
Yeah.
Ooh, that reminds me of something else. Yeah, I think that will lean away from it being at risk of gambling.
It's also this.
Tell that to the kids in Fortnite. Like, I need that
Right.
$50 skin.
Right, right. As a,
Default.
I would say, as opposed to chance-based things that affect gameplay. And that's where this like chance and skill thing that I'm rambling about comes into play again.
I mean, all the European rulings, that's not even an issue with them because they've banned, Overwatch, which is all cosmetic.
I think your question's a real good one, and what it relates to is whether or not there's a risk of loss. So for example, if you played a slot machine, no one ever makes a slot machine like this, but if you played a slot machine where you had to put in a quarter, and every time you pull that handle, you knew you would get at least a quarter back, maybe more. Okay, that would probably get you out of any risk of being charged with a violation if you were the guy who made the city a slot machine, because there's no risk of loss. There's no way that the player is ever going to be in the red. What you're asking is a similar question, which is, okay, let's say you're selling monsters at $1 a monster, or you can buy a loot box for $1, and there's guaranteed to be a monster in the loot box.
Yeah.
Okay, isn't that a complete defense? The answer, I think, is no, because certainly no one is ever going to buy the monster just as a monster anymore. They're always going to buy the loot box, and their willingness to put down that dollar is going to go up because there's a certain chance something worth more than $1 monster is in there. But if there isn't, they've effectively lost, and you can show it by proving they didn't go to the store to buy the monster. So again, the monster isn't the equivalent of $1. If it were, people would be buying it in the store. They buy the loot box because they hope to get something worth more than what the monster is worth to them. And they would have bought it for $1 if the monster were worth $1. So I think that would ultimately be a way for the other side, the plaintiff, to show that if it's $1 worth minimum of stuff plus a random amount more, that counters the claim that it's actually worth $1, because otherwise why are people buying loot boxes and not just going to the store? That'd be the risk factor I think would come up there. If you actually gave them $1 back, you could prove it, but a monster and $1 are not the same thing.
I just can't get past how trading card games don't fit, like literally.
Don't, oh, well,
How those aren't gambling something.
There's probably lots of petty gambling that's been tolerated by states all for a long time. I lived in Connecticut, which gambling is illegal there, and for a while the Coca-Cola company was selling 6-packs. The bottle caps had things in the you took it off and there might be something in there. Most of them didn't, but every so often it was like $2 or something like that. Okay, that's exactly the paradigm that you described. You have to put down consideration to buy the Coca-Cola. There's no skill involved. It's either got the prize in the cap or not. And sometimes there's a prize and sometimes there isn't. So there's a prize of value. If it says $2, I won $2. I don't think the state of Connecticut cared very much about that. And it goes, I think, to the question of why do they regulate these things?
Did it not say, like, in extremely small print somewhere that no purchase was necessary and that you could send a contest entry on a 3x5 index card to?
I think that's sweepstakes stuff, which is slightly different than gambling stuff, but that's a great point. Or did they say what the odds are, which is transparency, which helps with arguments. It's more about risks, right?
It's just like, but even stuff like that, it's just always seemed, and like saying, oh, but what if you make it so you always get at least something back? Like, it's just sort of, I don't know. It's all hand wavy, like trying to get around the fact that, of course, it's gambling, and like, who do you think you're kidding? Like, at least, I don't know. Like, I don't know if anybody's ever been to Japan or read about pachinko. Yeah, where it's just, so like gambling is illegal in Japan. Oh yeah, I wanted to ask about that. Gambling is illegal. Gambling for money is illegal in Japan. Pachinko is everywhere. It's actually one of the saddest things I've ever seen was seeing people lined up first thing in the morning waiting to get into a pachinko parlor. But yeah, you pay money for pachinko balls and you play pachinko, and maybe you maybe you get more pachinko balls than you started with. Maybe you have less. But then you can't get money back for them. You go elsewhere and exchange them for prizes. But in reality, the elsewhere is like some shady window in an alley, like around the corner and across the street, and the prizes end up, being money. And it's just like everybody pretends like that's not the way it works, but it's ridiculous.
Take one more question.
Sure, one more question.
Question back.
Could you define racketeering?
No. Sorry. We can talk about RICO more after this is done.
Let me give you one I think you can answer. Where do you think this is going to go from a regulatory perspective? Are they going to tighten down to where there is no loot box anymore, or is there going to be a safe loot box when this all steadies out?
I don't think I can answer that one either.
Really quick, the Big Fish lawsuit, is that done now, or did they appeal the appeal?
Oh, so as of 5 days ago, the case has been paused for arbitration. So we may never know what happens, but if it gets, yeah, we'll see. I think the answer to your question, I think what I think will happen depends on what I want to happen. And that's something I'm still thinking about. Loot boxes, I think there are problems there. I don't necessarily think that all loot boxes are evil. I like some surprise mechanics. So it's figuring out where I fall on that, and that's still something I go back and forth on. So I have a hard time deciding what I think will happen until I know what I think should happen. But I will say, I think that it will continue to be taken seriously. I hope that we do more as the games industry, so that people who don't know games don't mess things up. I think that there are good things we can do that are just more fair and equal, like transparency and odds. What do you think should happen or will happen? Sorry, I know we should stop soon.
Oh, I probably wouldn't be in a position to say anything better than that. One thing I will speak to is I've been an attorney for a while, and Kathleen knows a whole lot more about what? Oh, the book, right? Absolutely. Kathleen knows a whole lot more about game law than I'm ever going to know. But one thing that I would like to speak to is there's an occasional perception that people have that judges and legislators don't actually know what's going on. I've been an elected official too, and I didn't forget anything the day I got elected. The fact of the matter is, people like all of us inform this process. You can talk to your local legislator, you can talk to your state attorney general, or at least somebody who works with them. If you see something going wrong, they will listen to you because they want to get it right. And judges are not all idiots. Judges actually read some of the papers that get put in front of them. If those papers are written by lawyers who have you as clients, and you make sure your lawyer knows what you're talking about, that fact will make it into the paper the judge sees and uses to decide the case. So please don't presume that it's all going to be done essentially by a random number generator. Courtrooms are not that chaotic. If you want a parallel area to look at the evolution of computer law. The early days of computer cases coming to court, everybody said, oh, the judge is just going to fall over backwards and have a heart attack because he's never seen anything so blazingly cool as the internet in his life. And they've had no trouble at all figuring out ways to deal with internet-related cases, computer cases. And we may not always like the outcome, but they do manage to litigate and they do manage to decide. But I would encourage all of you who care about this, don't be a spectator. You don't have to.
Wonderful inspirational note to end on. And with that, before you applaud me, I have this wonderful book called Video Game Law, which I am giving to the IGDA. It is living with him for now, but you can see him if you'd like to read it. It has, I think, some practical application, practical understanding of copyright law, trademarks, contracts. So I only have one copy for you now. Maybe I'll work on getting more. And although I'm not an author, so I'm not pitching this for purchase, it is available on Amazon if you want your own copy, and I think it's like $20. So there's three, Greg Boyd and Sean Kane. They're both attorneys with Frankfurt Kernitz. There's like two other words after that, but Frankfurt Kernitz. I know them both. They're great. Greg was a UNC grad, and then also Brian Pine, which I'm not familiar with him, but there's also an ISBN number on the back if you want. But yeah, I tried it earlier. Video Game Law Amazon in Google search bar does work. So.
Does it have a chapter on Lootboxes, or is it kind of before this book?
You know what? I don't even know. I legitimately used this book when I was writing on some other video game law topics. But I don't think this was around when I was doing my paper, and I legitimately I don't think so. I don't know. Great question. Okay, that's all.
All right.